All right, 3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the third episode of a different podcast. If you haven't been listening in and tuning in to our previous ones, I'm Collin. That's Lou on the other side. How you doing, Lou?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? It's pretty hot here in Arizona, about 102. I was outside all morning, but it was nice, but just doing what I can.
Yeah, I'm hanging in there. We're not 102. And for those of you guys who are listening in, if you have never experienced Arizona heat this time of year, it is a unique experience, one that you could probably go without if you can avoid it. And it's a lot like being in an oven with just nowhere to go and skyrocketing AC bills. And it is something different.
Yeah. AZ in the winter, if you're going to visit, that's the time you want to come.
Yeah, Christmas is probably great. December is a great month in there. So.
Yeah.
In talk, kind of left the door of the conversation of living in a world without an internet. And I mentioned that it was kind of a rabbit hole because, it's pure speculation on our part, right? We want to kind of preface this conversation with the fact that it's pure speculation. But I think the current state of the world and COVID, I mean, everybody's talking about it, has kind of given us a glimpse of our reaction time as a society and as a worldwide society as well. And I'll let you kind of kick it off and kind of where you think we lie in that, and I mean the effects of the internet and how truly dependent upon the internet we are.
Yeah, and I mean I think it's fair to say that most people, most normal working class people, were able to either do one of two things: continue working in a social distancing manner, or just do their job from home. And I think we're realizing more and more that there's not that many jobs that you really need to go in for anymore. And the internet is growing so quickly that no one really knows how to handle it. And for people to be regulating the use of the internet, I mean, that's something that's going to come along with how the country goes in general, with our leaders deciding like, well, what can you do on the internet? What can't you do on the internet? And if the internet did go away, I mean, what would people do? I don't know, because Starbucks closed a bunch of stores. Stores are going to be, it's the brick and mortar store is going away.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's interesting to talk about, and it's interesting to look at, because obviously going through what we've been going through, the pandemic, the past, couple of months, and for the rest of the world, you're leaning on 6 months. And it's truly, it's worrisome from my point of view because of how long it took for us to, A, just have a plan, and then B, be able to implement that plan, and how unprepared we were for something like this. And this is something that, as we've learned and time has gone on, COVID has become, I think, less serious in the eyes of a lot of people. In the beginning, it was very, very serious. The numbers were coming out. There was like 5% mortality rate, something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously that's diminished, and we realized that we're in a weird era of kind of misinformation. There's a lot of information coming out. Nobody really knows. And this is just this is a virus, right? So obviously it's global, and there's that issue, but we have relied on the internet for so long. And as you said, the brick and mortar stores are starting to go away more and more. And this pandemic has pushed us in a direction of being more internet dependent, more dependent upon what's going on online, being able to work online, shop online. There is such a dependency, and obviously, like, it's a major problem because we're connected to these things all the time. Like, we're connected either to our computers, our phones, our watches. There is always some sort of technology in our hand. And if truly, in my opinion, if we were to go without the internet, I think it would be catastrophic because so many people not only depend on the internet for goods and supplies and information that's I mean it's probably, but the sense of self that people have online and kind of that connection to their online persona, their avatars, their whatever and whoever they are online, and that's obviously the beauty of being online. You can be someone different. You can be someone better. That, I mean, there is benefits to that, and studies have shown that. But at the same time, that sense of self, if you were to lose the internet, I mean, imagine just shutting your phone off for a week. Like that's a mini experiment that somebody could do. And people, if you said that at the time, their first reaction, there's no way. And so if we went into a world where the internet was significantly drawn back or gone, I think people's sense of self would just be
yeah. And you were kind of cutting out there a little bit, but the sense of self is an important topic when talking about this, because I think that, I mean, it's for where we are now, where we're constantly on our phones and computers and stuff. When you talk about sense of self, if we did lose the internet, people would, I mean, obviously there would be a lot of people that would be confused, depressed. It would be a huge transition. But I mean, anyone who actually, like, because right now self-development is a cool thing to talk about, but how many people are actually developing themselves, trying to improve their relationships? If we lost the internet, that's what would happen. I think that you'd get to know the people around you. I remember watching a video on some group of people that I think they were in Colombia, and they don't have any contact with anybody. They don't leave their village. Closest village is hundreds of miles away. They're always barefoot, and their toes, like, they look like little messed up hands is what they look like, because they use their feet completely differently. Like it's kind of back to that primal sense that we were talking about in the last podcast, where, I mean, that's what people really need. That's how your brain works. Like, being around other people, like, there are introverts, there are extroverts, but being around people is a thing that everybody likes. And there's obviously people that don't like to be in certain social situations. There's all of that. That's very real. But if you got one good friend, I mean, that's better than none. And if you got none, you're probably not in a very good spot. And I think that's what losing the internet would really show us, is that people really do value those relationships, whether or not they know it at this time, where people are so connected to or so attached to their phones, where it's like they are their phone. I think that's what would actually happen if things didn't turn into a World War III or something with the loss of the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it all the ways that it could go. But I like how you went about saying getting back to prime ideas, and I'm just to point out, like, the internet and technology and digital life in general is so counterintuitive to the mind and the body, because I mean, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, or a biological standpoint, it is something that, I mean, for ages, I mean, thousands of years without any sort of, I mean, yeah, we had technology tools, like that was all a thing, but those were all just to help us with a physical job, or, you know, everything else was just, I mean, you had to do it in your mind, you had to do it by hand. And that is how we as human is how you want to draw the scale. And with that being said, it's so counterintuitive, and I agree in the sense that we would have to revert back. And it's interesting, even if you look at and my parents' generation, they were kind of the last generation to not have the internet as you and I grew up with it. You and I grew up with it in its early stages, but I mean, emails were a thing, phones, texting. I mean, we've kind of been in that, we've lived with that and grown up with that. even if it was just starting at the time. So
Yeah.
if you look at how our parents' generation operates, and there are some who have, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, there are some who have been able to connect the dots and kind of morph from not having it to using it, and using it in a way that is easier for them, and they enjoy it, and they enjoy these social interactions online. And there are people who have done that, but there's a lot of people, and the older you get, in terms of right now and looking forward, like the older generations, they either don't use it or they don't need it. Like I think a great example of this, my mom was actually talking to her aunt who was like 85, and this was just the other day. She couldn't get a hold of her, and so after a few days, her aunt had called her back, and she was just like, yeah, I just got back from Verizon. I had to get a new phone. And my mom was like, well, why? And she was like, well, I was working in the garden a few days ago, took my phone outside, left it out there. It rained for 2 days. She couldn't find her phone for 2 days. She didn't even know it was gone. Okay. And then she was like, wait a minute, where's my phone? 2 days later.
Didn't even miss
okay,
it.
And it's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Obviously, it's waterlogged and we got some problems. So I just think that that's a great example of kind of like the realization that the older people, man, they're like, I don't need this. And they have their sense of self, and it's developed very differently. And it was developed in a world where we didn't have all this stuff. And so a world without technology isn't necessarily an extinct thing yet. And I point out yet because everybody in our generation, and maybe a little bit older than us, and certainly younger than us, have all grown up with this. And we're in this sense of self, getting our sense of self from an online persona, and all of that would disappear. And I'm not going to speculate whether that's better or worse. That's probably not for me to speculate on.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I think it would bring us back in relationships and different things like that, kind of like what we've seen with COVID, would be a lot better in the moment. I talk a lot, and just trying to just kind of soak everything up, and being present with what's going on around you, your inner thoughts, all these things, and they're easy to hide from with technology. So it would be interesting.
Yeah. And
without the internet.
yeah. And I think that in psychology, they describe anxiety as not being present pretty much. It's thinking too much about the future or thinking too much about the past, where it's like if you're sitting there and like for me, like say I had to work in a couple hours, it's like, well, can I be present in this moment without worrying about being late to work or something? That's something that I've always feared as a child, like when I was a child, like when you don't have your own car, it's like, how am I going to get there on time? Like it's not completely up to me. So it causes anxiety. That's a natural reaction to that stimuli. So you're just like, okay, well, hope I get there on time, out of my hands. But if you don't show up on time to practice, you're going to run. It's on you, no matter what. And I think that's a good lesson to think about when you talk about losing the internet or something like that. When people now are so caught up with that, it's like, well, I can just text somebody that I'm not going to be there. That's one thing I love. I've seen every single episode of Seinfeld, and that's all of their problems could have been solved by the cell phone. But the meaning and the friendship that they had, you don't see that really anymore. It's obviously a TV show, but what makes a TV show not real? It's just a lot of the minute aspects of life aren't there. It's all the the big events that go on in life. So if they had phones, a lot of their problems would have been solved. But it creates a whole host of problems, just like we're seeing now that we have phones.
Yeah, you mentioned something just like TV shows and like how they just highlight major events and I want to point out something that maybe people aren't aware of, or maybe they just try to search for this search for excitement or something. Most of life is just level. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna go through times where you go down and you go up, but you're gonna spend the majority of your life just kind of just chilling right in the middle. And like, I find it interesting that, speaking on the anxiety and depression and things, people aren't comfortable just being like just flatlining for a little while. Like people are always searching for the next something, you know. And this can be a big cause of addiction, in my opinion, where people are searching for something, and what they're addicted to is actually just kind of filling that void. And through a lot of, self growth and self-reflection, and obviously having time to do this with the COVID thing is a whole other thing, but really taking the time to self-reflect and again, just be in the moment and understand like where your thoughts and where your feelings are, like, is so important, because you can, even when you're just flatlining and there's nothing really going on that's like just going to bring you up to the top, or, you know, you're not necessarily in a depressed or anxious state, you're just kind of just hanging out. A majority of your life is spent in that, and I think people should be okay with that. And that just comes with being in the moment and like understanding how to be present.
And understanding that life is long. Like, you got a lot of time and you got to choose how to spend it. And it's like not necessarily that you're choosing to have anxiety or choosing to be depressed, but you do have to understand that every day you're going to spend a lot of time doing the same thing, you know, brushing your teeth, you know, going up and down the stairs. Like, if you're not mindful in those moments, it's really difficult. And that's why I think yoga is so amazing. Like, I've probably attended in my life not as many yoga classes as I should, but probably around 20. And I'm definitely going to start doing more of that as I get opportunities, because that now, like what I kind of, my point earlier was that people now, they just have anxiety. They think about, what am I doing next? And what you were saying, just what am I doing next? What did I do in the past? Yoga, it's now becoming a skill to be present. If you don't have that skill, you're probably just on your phone all day, having thoughts of anxiety-ridden thoughts. And it really is a skill. And to develop that skill is important. And I mean, it's an entire part of your brain, being present in the moment. Like, you gotta be there and understand that, hey, this is what's happening right now. Like, I just woke up, it's 6 a.m. and it sucks. That's the truth of the matter. But are you going to think about how much it sucks every morning, or are you going to get over it and understand that, hey, I get up at 6 every day? Like, that's part of life. Life's tough. Life is suffering. So, you know, at a certain point, you got to sack up and gain the skill of being mindful and in the moment.
And it's a conscious effort. It's a very conscious effort. And it's not like, I think when people, like, you read these self-help books and you hear people talk about being in the moment, they make it sound so easy, right? They're just like, yeah, just be in the moment, be present, be mindful of your thoughts, understand how you're feeling, but don't get attached to those emotions. Like, that's easier said than done. And I think that people don't really talk about that all that much. They talk about, hey, just be present. They tell you what to do, but they don't really tell you how to do it. And that, again, it gets back to what we've talked about previously, and it being a choice day to day. And I think there's this great book, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend it to absolutely anybody. It was recommended to me by my coach at Chemeketa Community College, who is also a professor in psychology. And it's called Chop Wood, Carry Water. And in this book, there's a lot of great lessons, and it's basically about a guy's journey to become a samurai archer over the course of a decade. And but long story short, there's this section in the book where they talk about looking at things through a lens of either opportunity or obligation. And I think this is a great point to make on what you said about being in the moment, waking up at, am I going to think about how much this sucks, or am I going to just say, hey, this is what we've got, and it's fine. We're just going to move through it. I'm going to feel better here in about 30 minutes, and we're going to be fine. And the idea of looking at things through opportunity versus obligation is a significant point to make, because so many people live in this obligation mindset. It's I have to go to work. I have to go do this. I have to do this. And that's the obligation mindset coming through. And that's a very negative cycle to get into, because you're always having to do something.
It
And
becomes an
if you
outlook
have
on
to go
life.
to baseball practice, exactly. And it translates everywhere. You start doing it once and it's just like, oh, then now I have to do this, and then now I have to do this, and then everything becomes an obligation, as opposed to trying to view everything, no matter how much it sucks, as an opportunity. And it's like, when you change the verbiage in your mind about how, like, if I have to get up at 6 a.m., I'm a morning person. I don't like getting up early, but like, if I have to get up early, then it's an obligation. But if it's I get up early, I get to get up at 6 a.m., I get to go to baseball practice, or I get to go to my job, then it creates something in the mind. It creates a better feeling about what you're doing. And if you've never practiced it, it's going to sound, you're like, no, it doesn't. Like, it's just changing the words. But no, it literally, it can change your mind, and it can change how you view things. So anybody listening, I would challenge anybody to start changing your inner talk and self-talk to I get to do this. And even if it sucks, like, you don't have to do it. And we get so stuck in the rut of I have to do this. I have to do this.
And try it for a month.
It's such a limiting mindset. They try it for a week.
Like, well,
even if you try it for a week.
Yeah. Well, when you put it in that way, it's like, if you tried it for a week or you tried it for a month, it's like, can you do it? Like, can you unprogram what you, like, you're so programmed to think negatively and to think, oh, I hate waking up every morning. If you start your morning thinking, oh my God. And it brings me to one of my favorite Will Ferrell movies of all time that most people have never even heard of. It's called Stranger Than Fiction. And it's not, I mean, Will Ferrell, he has some funny moments in it, but it's not typical Will Ferrell. It's literally a story about a guy where it starts off with a narrator, and she says his whole life changes from his wristwatch. And you don't find out why until the end of the movie. But the point is that if you're not looking for the plot points in your life, you could very easily miss them. You could very easily miss those opportunities when you don't have that opportunistic mindset. When you don't have, like, it's a thing now with women too. You see all these girls on social media that are so attractive, and it's all this, you're thinking, oh, that's all that's what people want. That's what I should have. And it's like, no, like, there are real opportunities with real women in your life. Like, have a connection with a girl that you don't want to be romantically involved with. Like, that was something that I was terrible at, like, seriously, like, really, really bad at. And I've made it a point to have female friends that I don't want romantic relationships with. Like, it's not easy to do as a guy now. Like, girls, it's the entire culture that not only women have created, but men also. I mean, like, it's a messed up thing. The relationship between the two is off, and part of it is because of the internet and all that. And it's a long discussion to be had that maybe the next generation will be better at. But like, it's really tough. So. Yeah, like, it's not a healthy relationship that men and women have, especially, I mean, for me, somebody that has spent a lot of time on Twitter, where you see all these, you know, do you see what I'm saying? It's like, you see all those things where girls point out a boy, and you see it has 150,000 likes, and it's like, oh man, that's what girls think about guys. That's not me. And it's like, well, that's a representation of the relationship men have with females right now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep this as it's important to put it in context, because oftentimes, now this is for both men, women, this is for absolutely anybody. A lot of what they put, not just on social media, but in interpersonal relationships, a lot of what people put out is truly actually a reflection of themselves. And I think it's an interesting psychological point that people oftentimes, like, if we're having a discussion and there's something that I don't like about myself, I will point that out in you. And so it's oftentimes what is pointed out is actually truly a self-reflection of something that they don't like within themselves. And then that's complicated, and obviously there's gonna be somebody out there who's like, no, like they don't actually like this about this other person. And that happens too. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm saying that it's just an interesting point to keep in mind moving forward about interpersonal relationships, and both online and in the physical present moment, that it is easier for somebody to point something out that they don't like in another person, that they don't like within themselves, whether they are conscious of it or not. And so it's interesting, and I think it's worth talking about, because if from this discussion somebody can take that piece of information and maybe look at something that maybe they're struggling in a relationship, and they can take that piece of information and be like, and self-reflect on maybe what they don't like about, I mean, who knows, maybe they're with somebody, maybe they're not, maybe they're talking in generalities, about maybe their next person or something, but just self-reflect on what you don't like about yourself and understand what you don't like about yourself, and not only work on changing that, but just make it known to who you are as an individual, because you have to live inside your mind and nobody else has to live there. Like,
Yeah.
and again, it's back to this whole have to get thing. Like, you get to live inside your mind, and for some people they have to live inside their mind. And the more you can make sense of not necessarily the world around you, I think there's so much to try to make sense of within ourselves and who we are as an individual and what we value. And having those things and knowing those things are super important, and they play such a big part in interpersonal relationships and how those can develop, and whether or not they can even find a healthy relationship. Because oftentimes, if you're not okay with yourself, if you're not okay with what's happening inside your mind and how you feel about certain things or how you feel about yourself, like, you under no circumstance are going to be a good partner to another person, because you're so focused on trying to fix yourself that you can't be present for the other person. So just to kind of all back, I think it's just important to understand what you like, what you don't like about yourself, and then understanding how that impacts your worldview, not only in interpersonal relationships, but just in general, and how you think about things, and how everything around you is just, it's viewed through a lens of how you view the world. And I think the more we understand about ourselves and our minds and who we are as conscious beings, the better off we're going to be in the long run, as an individual and as just a general species.
Yeah, and that's something that social media really highlights, is the hyper focus of, like, you can read something and see how it describes you in a way. It's like, that describes me, and it's like, maybe you shouldn't hyper focus on that the way that it seems to be put out on Twitter, because that's another, like, just a characteristic of an individual is charisma. And I watched the Jeffrey Epstein documentary, and it was like, that guy didn't even graduate college and got 2 jobs that required a college degree because he was so charismatic. If somebody articulates something, yeah, like, that's what like like an investigator will do when they're interrogating somebody. They'll frame things. They'll be so articulate, and they'll put things, and they'll frame it in such a way that they make you almost feel guilty, even though you may not have committed the crime that you're there to be interviewed about. And it's a scary way of being when people can manipulate people like that. And the worst thing you can do is look at a tweet or a post and manipulate your own mind into thinking that you're a terrible person because of what you're seeing on social media and how good it looks or how bad it looks. And it actually, the thing that looks terrible somewhat represents you. Because I think it's important to note that you really do have to acknowledge the bad things that you're capable of. And I think that's one of my second favorite psychologists is Carl Jung. And he basically describes something called the shadow, where you have to understand that your level of being, you can be, if there is a bar, you can only go so high as being good, but you can go equally low as being bad. And if you never acknowledge how bad you could be, then you can't really be that good. You can be cowardly in your actions, but for me as a male, I understand that if I chose, I'm not saying that I would do this, but if I wanted to beat up a girl, like, it wouldn't be that hard for me. I'm physically bigger, I'm stronger, but like, I understand that I can do that, but I can control that part of myself. And that's just a small example of all of the bad things that you can do. If and people don't really understand that. Like, you see something in Twitter, it's on Twitter, it's like talking about how many things, how many girls like claim to be like sexually assaulted and all that. It's like, well, me as a man, like, yeah, I get it, because like, I could do that to a girl. Would I ever? Absolutely not. I control that part of myself. And if you can't control that part of yourself and you don't acknowledge it, it's almost cowardly. And do you see that distinction that I'm making?
I do. I you're going because you, and then again, it gets back to the self-reflection piece that I was talking about. You have to understand who you are. And the thing, I think the unique situation that we have found ourselves in the past few months with COVID and being stuck at home, you can't go see your friends, or at least you're not supposed to. You're seeing who's in your house. You go to the grocery store, and that's it. And what this has done, and everybody's being laid off. They have so much time. It, to me, says a lot about the person, how they have chosen to spend this time.
Hmm.
And I say that because there's kind of two, in my eyes, there's two ways of looking at it. You can waste this time and you can just blow right through it. You can play video games for 10, 12 hours a day. You can just do this for months on end. And then when it's over, oh, I got to go back to work.
Hmm.
Or you can take a different approach and you can try to grow from something like this. We may never have you know what? I hope we don't have a time like this again. I hope that I don't have to spend a couple of months at home,
Hmm.
but with that being said, like, this is such a unique opportunity either have missed because things are starting to open back up, or are currently missing and haven't taken the time to try to understand themselves better, understand what they want from their life a little bit more, understand just who they are, what they don't like. Maybe you found a new hobby. Maybe you found a new person to talk to. Maybe you don't want to talk to the people you've been talking to. Maybe you want to try to focus on, understanding the people around you, surrounding yourself with better people, more positive people, things people that elevate you in some way. Like, there's two approaches in my opinion, and you can't. It's like, yeah, you can kind of do both, but one is always going to outweigh the other. In my opinion,
Hmm.
it's not going to be completely equally balanced. And so, for the people who have chosen to take the self-reflection route, I applaud you. And because that's hard to do, and it's easy, it's so easy, and especially with technology and especially with media, it's so easy to run from that and just be like, nope, I'm not going to do it. I don't really care to take that time. And to be honest, I don't want to know more about myself because I fear that person. So it's
Yeah.
easier for me just to distract myself with other things instead of trying to take the time to truly understand yourself, truly grow, and be better when all of this is better. You know what I mean? When we're able to go back out, then I hope we have people who understand more about themselves, who are going to treat people better, who are going to try to take an empathetic approach. Like, I think it's such
That's
a
the direction
unique
forward.
time. And yes, and I hope people are taking that time and putting in that energy, because I want to live in a better world just like everybody else. And, well, I can't say everybody else. That would be a vast generalization. But for the majority of people, I would assume that people just want to live in a better world. And so, I hope that we can get there. And I hope that we can use this as an opportunity, again, getting back to that, instead of an obligation, being stuck at home, well, try to do something with it. Try to learn something. Try to pick up a new hobby, and it's in some way better yourself, because we don't get these opportunities all that much. And at least in my life, I've never had an opportunity like this. I've never even had more than 2 weeks off of something. So it
well, and you
I hope
you are
aren't
you. Yeah, because you are you all the time. Like, and that's a very simple statement, but simple statements can be, when people take simple statements and they apply them every day, they become very valuable. And it's like you are you all the time. And like I didn't quite articulate my point before earlier, but like Jeffrey Epstein, like that guy was himself all the time. He was corrupt all the time. Like, you look at a guy like that and what he did, like, how did he get away with it for so long? There's a huge problem up top with that stuff, and that needs to be addressed, because like when I said like that's the way forward, what you were describing was people need to be better to each other. People need to get back to focusing on things like relationships and the family unit. Like, the family unit is going away. Like, it's a sad outlook to focus on things like that, where there's all these people that do these just beyond messed up things. Like, it's extremely scary. And watching that documentary, like, that's going to stick with me, like, for sure. Like, you can't watch that and say, man, he did that to all of those people. He created a pyramid scheme of that crazy, just effed up stuff. Like, that's a real thing that you have to look at and say, like, could that be me? And that's what I look at as someone that comes from a Jewish bloodline. It's like, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a German soldier in 1940, and I look and say, all right, they're about to start rounding up all these people and mass murdering them. Like, you can't see that, that people thought that Hitler was a positive and good leader. He really wasn't, obviously. But me, as somebody that comes from a Jewish bloodline, Polish Jewish people, there were 3.25 million of them before the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, there were 250,000. So that's what, 95% of the population is gone. So one of my ancestors made it in that 5%. And so when you look at it that way, it's like, if I was a German back in the time, I would just been doing my job. So like, it's a thing where it's like, you can see the evils of humanity, but you also have to understand the evils of humanity to actually move forward. Because a lot of people now, especially now, are unwilling to acknowledge the other side, unwilling to acknowledge that there's slight pieces of themselves that are a part of the problem. And the point of this is not to bring race into the matter, but everyone's at fault. If we're going to move forward, we have to do it together. The separation
it's a collective
can't be
unit.
Exactly. And the further you shift blame, the worse things are going to get.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me that we live in a society that we do. Like, it's, again, I talked about it in terms of the self, and not wanting to even reflect on any of the negative stuff. Like, because the ego for some people, I would say for the majority of people in society today, you have the ego just running the mind, and they believe that the ego is part of themselves. And now, like, this comes from Buddhist teaching more than anything, but we recognize that we are not the ego. We are that watches the ego. Then we can start to understand, hey, the ego is something separate from me.
Yes.
And the ego is charging my thoughts right now, not me. And who needs to be in control is not my ego. And again, what I was talking about and referring to earlier was the fact that we don't want to, I understand there's a lot of bad news out there. I don't particularly watch it anymore, because there's a lot. It's all negative. It's draining emotionally. It's draining psychologically. Like, there's steps you have to take to protect yourself in that way. Obviously, I'm not uninformed. I read, I listen to things, I find my information, but I find it in other ways. But with that being said, a lot of people don't want to deal with the problems in society. They just choose to run, and I'm talking now more generally and outside of just the self. They choose to just ignore the bad things. And if I ignore it long enough, it'll just go away. It'll take care of itself. Because, you get the law of, I forget what the law is called, where you have like a whole bunch of people staying around and one person collapses and then nobody ends up calling calling 911
Bystander
because they
effect,
assume somebody
right?
else does it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bystander. Yes. That's kind of the same thing, but on a just vastly larger scale. Where if we just like kind of just ignore it and then we're just like pushing it away and like, hey, somebody else will take care of it and it'll just get better. Like, yeah, that's the easy approach because you don't hold any responsibility. You're just running from that responsibility. In
Yeah,
my
you
opinion.
didn't do it.
And so yeah,
go ahead.
and it's just something that it's just so easy to do. And that's what we're seeing in all, I would say, most situations that are happening all over the globe. Oh, somebody else will do it. Somebody else will do it. And it's just like, no, we have to take responsibility because in some way, shape, problem. The way that we're involved are hard to understand. And it's especially if you're looking at yourself because you have personal biases and you're going to view you through a lens that's much different than if you are viewing me through a lens, which you are literally right now, but that's not what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? You're
from a judgment point of view.
Me through a lens and through your exactly. And so, I just think, I don't know. I think
it's
that
important
people are taking an easy path.
It's really important to acknowledge the other side because that's how a dialogue and a conversation starts. Like if somebody wants to take what I said earlier and blow up the part I said about me being able to do bad things, they can do, well, maybe it was him that did, all that. It's the possibility to nitpick it is always there. You can always nitpick, but can you actually take what somebody says when it's not worded perfectly and try to understand where they're coming from and try to say, oh, this is what he actually meant, not what he actually said. Yeah, maybe I didn't articulate it perfectly, but are you actually listening? Do you understand that I'm trying to show what I see and how I'm trying to grow myself? Like you can take there's two routes. There's one where you can say, oh wow, he sounds like an asshole, but no, I'm actually trying to convey a point that I feel very deeply is something that people are unwilling to have a conversation and a dialogue. And when you can't acknowledge the negative aspects of yourself, it can create a lot of anxiety and it can create all of those feelings where it's like, oh man, like I'm not perfect. I'm not this person that I see on social media that appears to never make mistakes. Every single person is deeply flawed. It doesn't matter. You might think you found the perfect girl, perfect guy. Every single person, it's a human, it's part of the human condition to be deeply flawed. And some people just decide like, hey, I know that people are deeply flawed. I know there's a risk that I'm going to offend somebody with what I say. And a lot of people nowadays are so soft that it's almost impossible to have a conversation with them without offending them and them taking the conversation in a direction where it's like, oh, wow, I can't believe he just said that. Like I'm offended, so I'm not willing to have a conversation. And that's probably one of the biggest problems we face today.
Yeah, and I think two things. First thing, for those people who are in relationships or have, some sort of interpersonal relationship with somebody, which is essentially you realize, and this is a good way of putting it, and is that you realize that everyone is flawed yourself, including the people who you choose to have around you. And the people who you choose to have around you are the people who you realize that like their flaws are, and that's just the bottom line. Like, yeah, they're pretty bad at this or they're pretty bad at that or whatever. But like, hey,
You're cutting out.
That's essentially what interpersonal relationships are. Okay. I was just saying
You're good now.
that essentially what interpersonal relationships are just me putting up with somebody else's flaws and me realizing like, yeah, it's worth putting up with.
Yeah. And it's
Like,
just decided like,
because
hey, I get
nobody's
it.
perfect.
Like, I
It's
get it.
just like,
Yeah. Like, you're like me. And I'll be
yeah,
honest with you about my flaws.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, but that was just a random thought. I mean, that's basically what interpersonal relationships are. Just putting up with other people's BS, and like you're choosing it, and it's fine, and it's okay to have that and understand that. But to your point, that I wanted to get back to on a more serious note is the ability to articulate ideas. And I'm gonna use the word argumentation setting, but even just in regular dialogue. And argumentation isn't like a screaming match. I'm talking about having differing opinions on something and trying to come to a general consensus.
Yeah.
I think that it's an interesting point when you're looking at argumentation. One of the biggest things I learned in studies about argumentation should be done through a lens of love. Now, I'm not talking about like you just adore the other person who you're arguing with. That's not what I'm saying. But this idea of argumentation out of love is, and this came from a professor who taught argumentation for like 40 years. Like she was well versed in this stuff, and this was her main point. Day one point was argumentation out of love, and what that means is approaching somebody who you don't agree with, or you're debating with, or you're having a conversation with that is different, and they have differing opinions than yourself. And if you with this match, and you're not going to be able to get anywhere or find common understanding. And argumentation out of love is having empathy, having respect for the other party, and understanding that you don't have to agree, and it's okay that we're not agreeing on something. But you anyway, to the point of articulating the basis of argumentation is the point of general main idea, and then having premises and facts to back that up. And where I think we have a lot of issues in dialogue is where people just skip the whole premise thing, and they're just like, they just tell you what they think, and then you're just supposed to accept that at face value.
Yeah.
And that's not how conversation and deep dialogue actually works. Like, you have to have premises. You have to help the other person understand like why you feel this way. And in that, you're going to gain perspective upon yourself and how you view the world and how you view the topic that you're actually talking about, because that can gain greater insight not into yourself and into the conversation. And these reasons and being able to explain them and articulate them verbally, written, and a lot of communication happens with our bodies and our body language. Like, that's a whole other thing that we can get into at a different point. But like the ability to articulate, and Jordan Peterson, your guy, your
Number one.
Yeah, that's right. He puts it so well in the sense that if you can articulate something, you have power. And I think that it gets back to this idea of just a simple thing, a simple idea, but it's so powerful. And the ability to articulate something and understand why and being able to convey that is so key. And people just kind of, like I said, people just like to blow right by it and just completely ignore the other side and try to force an idea upon somebody else. And you're not getting anywhere with that. You're not having a dialogue. You're just forcing it upon somebody. And I think that's important. It's an important point to make, because what we're doing is not, I am in no circumstance trying to force my worldview upon anybody else. I think that it's important to have an extremely open mind. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. But these conversations can't just sit by the wayside and just not happen. And there needs to be somebody talking about some of these things that we're talking about. And there should be more information spread into long-term discussion or long-form discussion regarding these issues, because like we talked about in episode 1, like the soundbite world that we live in is just, it's crazy to me that anybody can feel informed by seeing an 8-second clip or a tweet, because it's just tiny amounts of information.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's about finding a common ground. Like, well, it comes back to, how do you define the word argument? Like, it's like, you can describe it as, me and Colin are having an argument because it is a conversation where we have differing viewpoints, where I'm trying to understand his perspective and he's trying to understand my perspective. When you could also think of it as, you're walking down the street and you see a man and a woman yelling at each other, and it's like, oh, they're having an argument. Like, two completely different things. But to have an argument of the latter, of what I just described, where it's the man and the woman, like, that's what happens on Twitter. Like, what happens on a podcast is what we talked about first. Like, I literally described it, but to understand the difference in those two definitions is very important, because they're both definitions of the word. But I think that's when it comes back to how important language is, and education. Like, you're lucky enough to have that teacher that taught that class for 40 years, teaching you what an argument is. And sometimes it takes a whole class to teach somebody that, because some people don't get to grow up where my high school was a top 10. The Blue Valley School District is top 10 or whatever every year. You know, I come from I was very lucky to go to that school. And I had a lot of really great teachers there, and I didn't realize it at the time. I was thinking, oh my God, another day of school. Please, God, help me get out of this. Like, please, Mom, call me out. But like, I was so lucky to go there. Like, I was so lucky to have an opportunity to go to college. And I probably wouldn't have gone to college without baseball. I was lucky to have a why. But I think that comes back to just, people don't get the education that they need. People don't get, especially in high schools, like the way that people are teaching now is too soft. And teachers have to stand up for what they think is right, and not just go with the norm. And I'm not giving a shout. I'm not trying. And it's like, pay teachers more. Like, people they handed us all $1,200 checks, and I used my $1,200 wisely. I needed it. Thank you for that. But where was that money the whole time? Why wasn't that going to education? Like, what, all these kids, especially in the inner city, are getting, they have no reason to go to school. Like, some of them, if you don't have money in your lunch account, you're not getting food there. Like, why would you go there? It's much easier to steal something. And like, I'm not trying to speak on the inner city too much, because I have spent a very limited time there. But one thing I would definitely like to see is more funding going to those schools. And if I can help, let me know how. I would love to do so. I'll coach I'll coach kids in the inner city. I'd love to have the opportunity.
Yeah, and again, the open-mindedness of these conversations, and the way I feel that we're going about it, and hopefully you guys feel the same way, is it's so open-minded, and we want to have these discussions, and we desire to be more knowledgeable, and to try to understand things differently, and we truly want to do that, and that is our overall goal. And obviously, if we're more knowledgeable, we get to share that with other people. And I think in and of itself, that is a very special thing, because like you said, not everybody has had the opportunity to, go get educated. And that's no fault of their own a lot of times. You know what I mean? That's like, they just don't have the resources. Like, there's a lot of people in this country that do not have the resources. And like you said, I probably wouldn't have chosen to go to college without baseball, and I certainly wouldn't have graduated without it. So with that being said, like, yeah, I had a why, and so maybe that made my path a little bit easier, I think. But one point to your example about the two people, me and you, versus the two people and arguing, having
Butting heads, yeah.
Two different ways that they're going about it in different ways. You and I are going about it in a very process-oriented mindset, where we want to understand how something happens, and we're not worried about the outcome. Like, the beautiful thing about this that maybe people don't understand is, like, we just start this and we just go. And it's
Yeah.
very process oriented, and we're like not worried about the outcome. Like this is all just stuff that it just the conversation is just flowing naturally, and there's literally no plan. And so with that being said, I only say that because it's so process oriented. We don't worry about the outcome. Like I go back and watch these things just like other people do, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense, or oh, I didn't do that, or that was not a complete thought. Like I do the same thing, but with the people who are just screaming at each other, and from my perspective, they're going about that conversation and that argument from a completely outcome oriented position. Like they just want something. There is no, hey, let's sit down, let's have a talk. It's
Let's
like,
find a middle
no,
ground.
I have this point of view and I'm right, and I need you to believe that I'm right. And that's not how we should be so much more focused on the process and and trying to understand, again, ourselves, our point of view, and then conveying that to the other person, and then having them do the very same thing, and us being empathetic and being good enough listeners to be like, I get it. Or maybe I don't get it, and then I'm going to start asking questions. Why? What does this mean? So I can get to a deeper understanding, but that is so process oriented, and it's time consuming in a lot of ways. And people, God, we live in an instant world. You can find anything, no matter what, instantly, and it takes you 4 seconds, and you're done. And that's not how interpersonal communication works. That's not how just interpersonal relationships work at all. And so it's interesting because if we focus so much on the outcome, we actually lose the outcome that we desire, instead of focusing on the process and letting the outcome take care of itself. Because if the process is good, the outcome will be good in most cases. It's not like a law. It's not like a universal law. But like if you focus on the process, more than likely your outcome will be better and your results will be better. And so I just wanted to make that distinction that they're going about it in two very different ways, in terms of their process versus outcome, and how much that weighs into what they are saying and how they are going about the conversation. It's important to understand because so many people live in this outcome oriented world where we just want things instantly. We want it taken care of, fixed, boom, done, and you just move on. And it's not how life can work.
Yeah. And when you're outcome oriented, it's like, man, you're so specific that you think that you actually know what you want. Like you think you know what you want. Like, cause me, like this conversation, I'm going to look back at it and I'm going to see how fired up I got about these concepts, because that's what I've been working on in myself since I really started to take psychology with a passion, learning about it with a passion. And when you look at it from the view of process over product, which is Inky Johnson's quote that I have put on my chest right here. You don't know what you really want. Like you have a goal in mind, but what you learn over the process is so much more important than the product, that it's like, okay, I didn't even get what I wanted. Not only did I not get what I wanted, I got something completely different, almost the opposite. But what I learned during the process was what actually was valuable to me, not the outcome.
Journey over destination. And as cliche as that sounds, it truly is journey over destination, process over outcome. And it applies in athletics. And obviously, like a lot of this comes from my athletic background and trying to understand how to be more successful. But that it applies in my eyes so universally, no matter if it's in business, people, just your day-to-day life. Like this can be applied just about anywhere. And like people don't understand it. People don't like understand the meaning behind all of it. And the more we're able to do that, I think the better off we're going to be in the future. And the things can happen in a million different ways, but the more process oriented we are, the less we give up the outcome. I think the happier we will be, and people will find a sense of purpose much easier and much faster than focusing on the outcome, because you gain so much more. You learn so much more about yourself, who you are, and who the people around you are too.
Yeah, and if people just really start to take the mindset of the process over product, process over outcome, where they focus on how they live their life more so than just focused on outcomes and trying to be more like people that we see on our phones all the time, it'll start to create a sense of community amongst different types of people where we can all move forward and we can all find peace within ourselves where it's like, okay, I'm living my life to do it for me and to do it for my community, not to be so just focused on material things and specific outcomes that you can't control.
Yeah. And next time or in the future, I think we should get to controlling what you can control versus the uncontrollables in life, and how important understanding that is. But unfortunately, we are looks like running out of time. And I want to take a quick second to shout out some of the guys. Spencer Torkelson, congratulations, going #1 overall in the draft during our podcast. And the rest of you guys that get drafted, it's a pleasure to know some of you guys, and congratulations as always. And I want to send a quick shout out. I got my Alaska Gold Panners hat on today. Spent the season with them up in Alaska, man, and all good people up there. So if you guys are in the 49th state, it's a pleasure, and hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah, and a quick shout out to 3 of my boys over at Mississippi State: Justin Foscue, Jordan Westberg, and Tanner Allen, all projected to go real high in the draft this year. And I'm more than excited to watch their careers progress. So as always, Collin, it's a pleasure, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, sir. Cheers, Lou.